Yeah, let's go.
All right, so welcome to the August 12th School Board Budget Finance Committee. I'll just start off, I thought that our last regular school board meeting when we came up with the school opening went pretty well. As well as it could, I thought. I thought everybody was really civil. I thought the ideas were good. I thought there was a lot of things that were added, particularly my own personal nervousness about the actual reopening, that it's better to, the school year is a marathon, not a sprint, and it's nice to know that we're kind of going in with maximum preparation to deal with what is so many unknowns. So that said, we'll start off. So the first thing on the agenda was the actual talking about the budget process, which Michael asked. So do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so the next page is the calendar. I think this kind of dovetails with the last item, the budget goal process, but the question that I really think want to ask is, what do we need to provide the full school board, and when do we need to do that? So that's, I think beyond that, in terms of what's on page 2 and the rest of the board and department process, that I think is in pretty solid shape. It's more of a, when I look at that, if we're really, this says September 16th, school board goals, fiscal year 22 budget, on page 2 here as the top line. If that's where we're headed for, then we have this week and then September 9th to arrive at a recommendation, I think. Is that the rest of the group's understanding?
Traditionally, we've started in September, and then we've kind of muddled our way through it because we're still waiting for information. In this case, we'll be waiting for retirement system information, health insurance information. And so we start the process, and Sue and I are flying blind at that point, which means the school board is getting incomplete information in September, but we've always started in September because we knew it was going to take us a while to get there. So my question for the Finance Committee is, we can start formulating a working goal here, but we might want to wait until these milestones are in, because it will influence ultimately what the three of you want to recommend to the school board. So, we can, I guess what I'm saying is, if you want hard data to work from, we have to wait till October. Otherwise, as a full board, we'll be in the same dilemma we are every single year, where, we get to this place where we start talking at a budget goal, but we don't have the complete information. So part of my thought in terms of having a finance committee is that the three of you would have the completed information, so that when you're formulating the goal, ultimately what the obstacles are, the real obstacles, as opposed to, we think this is going to happen, we think that's going to happen.
You have to speak into your mic.
Oh, sorry, I forgot we were. So traditionally when we've done it in September, Sue and I only have maybe 3/4 of the information you guys need to make an informed decision. So if we want to really guide the board in terms of hard data, we should wait until October, but I would ask Sue if she agrees with that, because I'm just responding to Michael's question. But we've never had a finance committee before, and I think that this is going to be super helpful, be a lot better for the full board to have complete information, and then when you all are making your recommendation to them, it'll make sense. Because I know the frustrating part in September historically has been, we're making best guesses, and that's been frustrating for the school board. I totally get that, but that's the information we have at that point. So I'd ask Michael and Al and Brian whether you guys think it's worth waiting the extra couple of weeks so that you have really hard data, because it makes a difference. As Michael alluded to, 1 and 5 are related. It makes a difference as to where you really feel like you want to recommend the board come in. the way that this is presented here, it's pretty artificial still. I can tell you what that limit is, and then then the three of you are going to say, okay, so build a budget around those. And without that information, that it's going to be a conjecture budget again, and whether that helps you or doesn't help you. I want you to have the information you need to make the best judgments possible and best recommendations. So Sue and I need feedback from you as well in terms of how you would like to proceed. I think September is where we always put it. When Sue built the calendar, we didn't have a finance committee, and generally speaking, we spend about 3 meetings trying to figure out what that budget goal is. And with all the information that the three of you have had and the hard data, when we present 3 scenarios, it'll be based on reality and not conjecture.
So the unknowns that we're going to have are what? The health insurance?
Retirement system.
And the retirement things. But
Funding, you won't know adequacy till November.
we know taking those off the table, the other stuff we do know. I mean, our expenses stuff we should know. So we know a big block. And I also was kind of wrestling this at the last meeting. I talked to Jim. I was trying to figure out what is the process that we're coming up with a budget goal that the board is going to actually say, yes, that's our budget goal. And so, I mean, I think like we can at least tell them, and we've laid down like 3 scenarios at the end, what we thought they were. I'm not sure where you are departmentally yet with everything, but we can at least have a lot of stuff ready. And give the board the caveat, we don't know what the retirement incentive is, and we don't know what the health insurance, and that can change this. But at least lay the foundation for them when they look at that. I mean, I don't know what the rest of the board is going to say, but we can say this is what a 1.5%, 2.5%, 3.5% looks like with an asterisk. Do they think that this is the route that we should go down? Is this, and then with the idea that we'll come back in October with the unknowns to add in there. I keep coming back to how Todd did the town budget, and I think, because these are all blending together, but I think it was last year. And what I really, really liked about it, he came up with a budget that he thought was, the initial one was the town council was pushing to have no tax impact whatsoever. And so that was like the one scenario. And so as he worked his way through a budget, he came up with what he thought was the best balance of providing essential services to the town and being fiscally responsible. And so he laid out like what are almost our 3 scenarios, and he had a list, what are the things, what differentiates the 1.5% from the 2.5% from the 3.5%. It was a list of like, you may lose these teaching positions, or you'll lose this on the facility. And so it allowed the town council to see the actual impact of where they were going. And then it allowed them also to say, you know what, I can't live without that. And so it moved towards, so I can't do the 1.5, maybe we should add these in. And so, I think it allowed us to work through the difficult decisions of what we could tolerate and what we thought was the best impact.
And the other thing I would add, Al and Michael and Brian, is that I didn't present 5 as budget goals, just raw increases in terms of what that would mean. So it doesn't incorporate, the language that you guys created at the last year for this year. It's just simply saying, this is how much money the budget would go up if these were the 3 scenarios. So there's no finessing here. It doesn't, right now, it doesn't consider, impact on towns. It doesn't consider any revenue. It's just, this is what it would grow if these were the 3, in a very blunt way, kind of a hammer instead of, well, I don't know what my scenario, what that metaphor was going to be now. It's gone, but you get the idea.
Now, who do we have contracts coming up this year too, right?
We have the
Just one or
bus
2?
driver's contract, and we have the para contract.
So at least those don't affect us as greatly as a teacher contract does.
Right, historically, they would be, just shooting from the hip, which Sue hates me to do, but you're talking about, usually about $60,000 on both of those, so you're probably looking at $120,000. So both of those together are still a much smaller impact than the Guild contract.
And I know those go in as a warrant article, but when we're doing the budget, though, do we figure those numbers in, correct?
It all depends on how you do the budget goal. So if you say that these three scenarios, you want them embedded in those, then that's how we do it. If you say you want to know what happens if they're outside, then we can do that. It's really how you want us to present it. I would say the last probably 3 budgets, you've asked us to include, even though they're separate warrants, you've asked us to include the impact inside the total gross. So when Sue does that spreadsheet for you, she shows you the operating increase and then any outside contracts right below that, and then we get to the final impact of, what's the real impact of the budget.
And will those be on time, so we have that information?
Well, actually, Al's been asking me to, meet with these 2 groups all summer, but quite honestly, there hasn't been a minute to do it, and, they'd be more than willing to come to the table. It's just a matter of us making it happen.
Maybe an interesting thing on that scenario is, and I've lost track of, is the 16th our first meeting in September?
Second meeting.
You're talking about the full board?
The full board.
Yeah.
So,
I just picked that number, that date, because that's been prior.
no, I was talking about the bargaining groups. So how about in the first meeting of September, we have a non-public for the full board where we talk about, just get them up to speed of what the bargaining unit is, what the past contract is, and get their thoughts on giving us some
So I would
guidance.
I would encourage it, that if that's what you want to do, Al, that we, Michael is here and Tom tomorrow will be meeting on the agenda. I would encourage we have that meeting, this meeting coming up. Then, we can bring, we can invite the bus drivers to the table, we can invite the para group to the table, and we're not waiting into the school year. The bus drivers in particular approached me about starting in the summer, so, I think we can jump on it right away and with the board's guidance and see how it goes. I will share that the bus drivers, affiliated with a national union about 3 years ago, and it went very well in terms of negotiations. But the management of that unit has changed, and I have had zero exposure to their representatives, so I don't know whether, it'll be a traditional bargaining or it'll be, a non-traditional bargaining. I know that the current bus driver leadership has been awesome to deal with, but I don't know how, it'll play out when we sit down with them. The para group is a person that we've been very familiar with, and she's been awesome to work with. The para leadership has been awesome to deal with. So it's really, that one, I think we'll probably get into a non-traditional bargaining where we just share about what concerns are, and then after we do that, a few meetings, we usually start crafting proposals and coming to closure. At least historically, that's been a relatively healthy, productive process. I would anticipate that would be the same. I'm flying a little bit blind on the bus drivers because I have no exposure with them. They're new leadership at this point.
I leave it to you guys. You guys are doing the agenda. If you think we have room on the next agenda, I think that's great. I was just worried because I know we're doing the athletic stuff, and it's probably going to be a controversial one. But if you have, the sooner the better, in my mind.
Me
I would
too.
just as soon get going on it, because I know this, we've done a ton of contracts, but this one, this is the weirdest one we've ever done.
Yeah, the setting is so different. It's the COVID impact on everything.
Yeah.
The other way of approaching it, Al, would be to set up the organizational meeting. So if Michael and Tom look at the agenda tomorrow and say it's too much,
Yeah.
we can still meet,
Yep.
get the rules of the road kind of out, get an understanding of where they're coming from, and then, come in afterwards and get the direction from the full board as to, what they would like to see as the parameters for negotiation.
I mean, I'll leave that to you guys. I mean, the organizational one, we're setting up the meet, there's no money described. It's just like, we won't talk to the press and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's just simply
And
setting
we
up
can- and
meetings.
even-
So we're
we can
talking-
even- We can even go into a second meeting, because usually that's language issues, they're concerned about this, or they're concerned
Yeah.
about that, and then we have conversations about, how we might be able to resolve that, because a lot of, what I've found and Al has found is a lot of the conversations are in a non-traditional bargaining is really just about expressing concerns, and it never actually ends up in the contract, but it's a way for the bargaining unit to express issues that are something their membership wants us to hear, and then problem solve outside of the contract.
Same with us. We come with problems that we've seen that may be happening, and we're like, okay, can we talk about this? And it's like, and we'll kind of work through it. But again, I'm going to leave that to you guys on the agenda.
So we're really talking about a non-public session for the full board to provide guidance to the negotiations team,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I think we can discuss that.
Yeah, I think the big issue on next Wednesday's meeting is we have to have non-public with our attorney on Title IX policies, which we've gone from like 3 pages or 4 pages to 16 pages because of federal law changes. And, that could take a long time, or it could be, a short meeting. Hard to predict on that one. Depends on how many questions the board has.
So anyway, I'll leave that to you guys. Back to the budget thing.
What? Get us back on task?
Sorry. So again, like a couple of things I think that you mentioned, and maybe that's something that us as a subcommittee can talk about. There's nothing I hate more than wordsmithing during a full meeting, and I think which is always what happens with the language of the budget goal. And I would wonder if we could take a crack at what we thought was the best language of the budget goal itself. It always comes down to revenue and all this stuff. What does that look like? So at least it provides a framework for the board to work its way through
I would
it.
rather us do it and bring it as a suggestion, just so we can work more efficiently, I guess,
Yeah.
at the board level, because you know how long that takes. And I think we can do it more efficiently. I mean, that's what we're here for, I think, is to really get through the weeds, pull out the swampy stuff, and then get right to the point and say, what do we really want to do?
Right.
We have promises we've made that we know we have to work within, so that's kind of where our starting point is, and then work your way from there, so.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But if we're talking about potentially having a range, asking Jim and Sue to put together multiple scenarios that are different percentages, we're almost turning that process around. We're saying, all right, let's put together these different scenarios, and then we get to mid-October perhaps, and we're saying to the board then, we recommend whichever scenario based on A, B, and C. We're almost not setting a goal, we're setting,
Well, it's difficult for several reasons. One of them is because it's a tough budget to begin with. Number two, we're in a pandemic that we've never had to experience before. So there's still some expenses that are becoming this year and next year that we don't know about. So I think we got to be honest with the board and say, this is going to be different. This is going to be an odd one, because we're in a very odd, unique situation. So it's going to be an odd, unique budget. So, let's get let's keep our mind a little more open rather than locking into one thing, only because, the governor can come out next week and say something and throw our whole budget into whack, because it could have something that's a mandate that's unfunded.
Right, and I think doing it with a range of a few options gives us that flexibility.
I'm perfectly fine
We
with
see what the world looks like in October, And then we come back to the full board with, all right, we picked option C because we're seeing this in PPE, because we got this coming from the state, because we got this from the insurance. I don't know if that's
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot
acceptable
of, plus we got a wrench thrown into us for the retirement system that's going to be coming out.
Right.
next-
So the thing that
4 weeks.
worries me the most is like, so it's, I think, again, we can bring whatever it is, the 16th or whatever, say that we think we should provide you with these 3 scenarios, let us work through them. But what always worries me is not actually the scenarios, it's the actual language of what's included. Does it include the bargain contracts? Can you use offsetting revenue? So I think that language would apply to option A, B, or C. I just want to get, again, we stumble over that language every year. Like, what does it mean and what's included? If we could at least have a framework of what's included in each of the 3 options and how it works with that, I think it would be super helpful for guidance.
So, and then that gets to that whole, the heart of the issue is, so say we identify revenue, that pushes the impact down on the towns to 2.5% from 3.5%. But when we report it, it looks like it's 3.5% growth, but the impact is 2.5% on the towns. That's always a difficult communication as well, because, personally, and Sue and I have talked about this, this has to be a 2-pronged effort to minimize the impact on the town. We have to be able to identify revenue and expenditure decreases in order to, reach any of these scenarios. If it's all on decreases, then we'll be facing personnel changes dramatically on any of these scenarios, because unlike the past year, we do have the bond and now we're going to be facing potentially, most likely, an increase on the retirement system, which we didn't have in our scenarios as we opened our conversations in June. So, from a practical perspective, from the business manager's perspective, from the superintendent's perspective, we have to have the full arsenal at our disposal in order to service the community the best. If we're only looking at it from one side, then we'll be in, we would definitely have to be in a personnel reduction mode.
So I think you nailed the actual one term that we're looking at, impact. What the heck do we mean by that? So let's kind of, are we talking tax impact? Are we talking about, so I think that is the stumbling block. It has been the stumbling block the last few years. What the heck does that actually mean? So if we could clarify, and the board accepts what our clarification is of the impact, I think it would be really helpful in the
Yeah.
conversation.
Or
too.
do we want that to be the basis of the goal this year? The other side of that is you just go with whatever the bottom line number is and talk about percentages based on that, rather than talk about trying to roll it back to some segment of the budget.
Be easier.
Well, I don't know. Do we think that there is new identified revenue?
Well, I would share with the 3 of you that, when Sue and I have tried to put our heads around this in a realistic fashion, when we talk about, for example, Sue reported back to the board last meeting that between expenditures and revenue, it looks like we're $1.1 million to the good. You have to subtract the $400,000 that goes to the town, so we're at, $700,000 to the good, so we've taken care of our obligation to the towns, and my recommendation to the full board and to you as a finance committee would be to put that money into the emergency account. Well, that brings our emergency account up to something like 1.9. Then when we build this budget, I would be recommending that we take $500,000 and use it as revenue. Now, if Tom were here, he would talk about, short-term revenues and long-term revenue, so long-term impact. Reductions in the total staffing cost is perpetual. Using our emergency fund, if it was really low, would be not something I would recommend, but because it would be relatively substantial, we could actually get in my mind, and I'm just sharing my talk out loud to you guys, we could actually go probably 2 budget years and still have a $1.2 million budget at the end, because we're trying to run this budget extremely frugally. So as we build our emergency funds, they could actually carry us through the COVID budget years, and then we get back to a situation where we can wind that revenue down slowly as opposed to falling off a cliff. So I think it's logical that we would use some part of our emergency funds to help us through these and I'm anticipating the COVID years are 2 budget years, this upcoming one and the one after. So, I mean, that's something. And then, the Barrington revenue, Denise asked a question the other day in relation to the models, well, would Barrington families pull out? So I got an email from a Barrington family that indeed said that, So their choices in Barrington are us, Dover, or Co-Brown. So, that means they wouldn't come here because it's remote. They wouldn't go to Dover because it's remote, so that leaves Co-Brown. Yesterday, a call from the superintendent in Barrington, and he has 4 families who want to shift over to us. So it might be one of these situations where, as Denise predicted, we might have a negative impact, but on the other hand, there's a positive impact. And so I think the Barrington revenue, we should really, be keeping in our minds. And other than that, we really.
No, I just want to remind you that when you talk about that emergency fund, there is a cap on that emergency fund.
Right.
And I think it's right around 930. It's not 1.1. So when we get to that cap, you can't put any more in.
Well,
So-
if you take out before you put in,
Right.
you're good.
This year, we have 350 in there now, so we can get to somewhere around 930, and I'll verify that with DRA. If we don't use that, next year, we can't put any more in.
Right.
So-
we have to use it.
We have to, well, we don't have to, it'll just sit there, but
Well, if
you'll
you-
automatically be giving it back to the taxpayers, whatever you have left at the end of this year.
It would,
So in order to
clarify.
achieve that goal, we'd have to take out and put in
Right.
for these 2 years.
I mean, it's the same result, but you just won't, it'll be an unknown at year end, until
Just a-
year end,
just a
what
shell
that
game,
is.
right.
So you can,
Moving money here and there.
yeah, you can do whatever you want when you get to that point, but just remember, you got a cap on that
Yeah,
emergency.
the cap is 930, so if you take 500
Then you
out, you can refill the
refill it,
500 to
right,
930,
right.
right?
So it is, it's in different pockets of money in different places. You just have to figure out where you want to put things and how you want to strategically place them.
So when I think of the budget goal, and especially the impact, I guess I must be the simpleton in the crowd. I look at it like when you threw out say for example, a 1.5% increase in expenses is what it is from the fiscal, 1920 budget. Is that right? It's
2021.
Yeah, 1.962257. So when I talk about I always say you get to use revenues, which would be the emergency offset and the Barrington tuition money. So suppose when you come up with your rough budget and you come to us and you say, okay, we're at 2.6 million. And we want to use 500,000 from the emergency fund, and we get X amount from Barrington, and that brings us down to 1.9 million. That's what I consider to be the fair game for the budget goal. Again, that's the simpleton version.
I like simple.
But then that could translate into a higher impact for any one of the 3 towns.
For sure. I mean, again, that's
Just want to make sure I
back,
understand you. Yep.
back when Michael talked about it, it's about the apportionment, like what is each town going to grab from the budget? And that is, for us, really hard to predict because that's number of students and the, value of their properties. That's really kind of beyond our ability to do that calculation. Or, I mean, it is what it is. And to offset it, is really difficult. We don't have a large enough sum of money to really super bring it down, especially if it
Exactly.
spikes. And then that would also, and I don't want to think of the next fiscal year, but we don't want to deplete all of our emergency resources
So I
trying
would
to
say
get
that
some
we
going.
have to think about this as 2 budget years, Al. We have to, because, that's the window, we'll know what's happening in the economy. We really kind of have to think through that to 21, 22. to do the best job we can possibly do. I think beyond those 2 years, it becomes nonsense. I will tell you that I've done 5-year budgeting before, and it just becomes ridiculous in the third year because you're basing it on, very weak data. But I think that a 2-year budget cycle, we could think through, if we can get this one past the board and they get approval, we should go right into, predicting what the second year would be. I don't think our work would be done. I think we need to continue that work right into projections for the following year, honestly, because I think that's where the anxiety is for the towns in terms of our impact on them, and whatever we can do to kind of prep that work would be
So one other
critically
thing,
important.
if you do the 3 scenarios, and you say that the revenue we're using as an offset to get to that goal, the only thing I would say is that you keep the revenue the same for each of the different scenarios. So you don't say like, okay,
Right.
to get to 3.5, we're going to use $700,000 of the emergency fund, but the 1.5, we're only going to use $500,000. So that's the same, but our understanding is the impact is that the total change, the net, I think I threw it out there as the net change, and I think that met a lot of resistance, was the expenses minus the Barrington revenue and our emergency fund.
Yeah, and the Barrington revenue, it may not provide us anything, because they're pretty much maxing out their placement at this point. Last year was an aberration. This year, they're right back into the around 50 students routine, and the agreement that you and I and Tom crafted capped it at 200. So what we had projected, if you might recall, and it's good for Brian and Michael to know, is that the Oyster River natural bursts were decreasing as the Barrington numbers were going up. So the net result on the high school, for example, is pretty much where we are now. So it was kind of that marriage of the two data points. So, Barrington may not provide us any additional revenue in coming years because we have plateaued in terms of the ability for them to fill those slots.
So I'll
Well,
leave
the
some
only
of you guys your thoughts.
additional revenue would be from increases in the tuition.
Right. So the tuition
Which is,
rate
I know
goes
it's not
up.
a huge amount, but I mean, that would be the only increases we would see at that
Yeah.
point.
That's right.
So run that again, what you said for how to structure it?
So what I was saying is that so they'll come up with, so it's essentially, they'll come up with all the expenses, what all their departments need, the whole shebang, and that'll be the chunk of money. And then the unknown, of course, we won't know what the health insurance will be, and we won't know what the retirement will be. But in that case, the budget goal, say at 1.5, 2.5, or 3.5%, you could use the revenue from Barrington and you could use the emergency funds, but that revenue component would have to be the same for each of those different scenarios.
Apples to apples. I got it.
If you go back another step, were you talking about a structure for a goal, though?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to talk, I'm trying to get when we throw
Really,
this up, what's the actual
So
goal?
what's changing is the expenses, not the revenue. Is that what you're saying? Every scenario will have different expenses, but the same revenue.
No, I assume, you're right. Everyone will have, and that'll be like the difference, like the 2.5%, you'll say, okay, we really needed a bus, or we really needed this, and that's included. And then the 3.5%, we really needed a boiler or something like that. And so the expenses will change, but the revenue will not.
Yep.
So you're really just talking about what the bottom line budget number is?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is essentially kind of the way Sue presented it in the summary of the history.
Yeah, I think, again, I'm just quite certain you guys are going to be like reaching under the cushions for money and to try to save. But I think to try to just say that we went straight by expenses and don't use the offset of revenue, these won't be realistic numbers.
Yeah, and so just as you look back at the document that Sue had given you on the history of our all the time we've worked together and several years before that, you can see what the net increase on the budget was. The one of them, like I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, on that particular spreadsheet shows 4.5%. But that particular year, we had offsetting revenue, but when Sue shares it, she has to share what the net growth was. And so it really kind of masks the fact that the impact was a full point less than that on the towns. And so, that's when we start using revenue to offset an increase. We've done it in the past, and when you look at it historically, it looks like, oh, that must have been a big year because we had 4.5%, but it was really a net of 3.5%.
When do we find out the adequacy aid stuff?
November 15th?
So, I mean, that's going to be like, so I assume
November.
that even if we say, we throw out there, it's got to fall within these range, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5%, and you can use revenue as an offset, it very well could, it won't be until November that we say, oops, Lee got $400,000 less and it's going to be an 11% increase. So I think that's exactly what Jim, you just said. It's like there could be a possibility that we come back and say, okay, we'll try to do, the impact is the tax impact.
Right.
And I think that's a separate discussion. But I think in terms of crafting our initial goal, at least in my simple way, is like trying to attack what we can control, which is our expenses and the revenue.
Right. And when Sue presented, when we had the community leaders here, as well as the finance committee, when Sue had presented that, she actually thought she was presenting the worst-case scenario because we assumed that Madbury and Lee money were gone. But we, at that point, didn't know the impact on the retirement system. So even as scary as that sheet was, that would be even scarier if we have a number that we insert in there. So, I think the whole point of us working like this is to try to push down the impact as much as we possibly can, knowing that there are some really significant obstacles for both the school system and the towns when we're.
But isn't
trying
that
to
like
put
another
together budget.
conversation that we'd have among the town leaders? Because then the other mechanism for driving down the tax impact would actually be the town's surplus, where the town says, you know what, the school doesn't have any more money, or they can't deplete their funds anymore, but what can we do as a town? Should we use our reserve funds at this point to help level the tax spike?
And when that's happened over the year, just the 8 budgets that you and I have put together, Al, and we've done our due diligence here, and there's been a big impact on Lee or a big impact on Madbury or on Durham, that is exactly what the select board and councils do. They look at and say, okay, this is where we're at with the school and the town and county. We can't do that to the taxpayers, so we're going to have to push this down by using the undesignated revenue.
And that tends to, if you look at the history, I think that tends to affect different towns each year. I think if you look back over the last 8-10 years, it's not that, Madbury continually gets the big hit and has to try to balance it out with fund balance. It's a function of these variables of exactly where students are and exactly how the state interprets equalized valuation that tend to balance out over time.
Yep.
So it ends up kind of working itself out. So last year, I think Lee took money out of the fund balance to mitigate some of the.
Yeah, well, they do it every year, it's just how much they.
We didn't really, I mean, the thing on the town side with the fund balance is like your bond rate. They want you to have X amount of fund balance so that, in our case, we've been working to try to build it up. But anyway, I think that's another the impact, the tax impact, I think is another conversation besides the basic nuts and bolts of our budget. And I know it sounds crazy to say that, but it's like, I only say that because it's like really hard for us, because of the nature of the cooperative, to take 3 different towns under these rules and try to like mess with the tax rate.
I think Michael's observation is exactly right. Sometimes a town gets hit dramatically, and then the same year another town gets impacted barely at all. A couple of years go by, that town who got barely hit gets impacted very, very big way, and the town that got impacted in a big way a couple of years earlier it's negligible.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it does balance out over time. It's just really shocking to the town in the given year that, they're looking at, a dollar increase per thousand. That's massive. And
Yep.
that's why we've been sensitive at this level to try to see how we can, make sure that even in a dramatic impact year for one town, we try to mitigate that to some degree.
Yep.
But as you said, Al, we don't have the wherewithal to bring it down, much, because we don't have the ability to tap into revenue that doesn't exist.
I mean, I think what could be different this year, since we already had that town meeting, it would be really interesting to bring back some of the representatives from the town, say, after November, when we see what's happening with the aid, and we've really crafted what we think is the budget, and we can say, okay, here's what we think the tax impact is. This is all the money that we have. I think it can be more of a collaborative thing. How can we help each other? Rather than how can the school mitigate the tax impact, or what's happened in the past is how can the town try to do all this stuff to mitigate the school's impact? How can we work together to do the overall tax impact, say for Lee, Madbury, and Durham, like, both town and school? What resources do we have, and how do we work with that?
I think it'd be more on a transparency thing, too. I think if they see our process and our thought process that went into it, they may take a different view of how our budget works. Because our budget is so much bigger than theirs. And they just think we spend, when they're like, well, there's a lot of expenditures that are required, whether you want to or not,
Yeah.
And there's other ones that we're looking at and we're, being efficient with. So I think if they see it, then it gets back to the select boards. Then they discuss it, and they're like, okay, they're not really trying to pull it over on us. They're having the same issues we're having, just on
Yeah.
a much bigger scale. And I think that's what I saw with at least the last select board meeting. I think there was a realization that, like, okay, we have similar problems. Let's commiserate. Second, let's work together. And I think that was a step in the right direction, and I think that's a great idea, because I think the more we get them involved, the more, I think the easier it'll be all around on everybody, because now we all know what everyone else is doing, or at least have an idea what we're doing, and that we're not just running rickshaw over everybody.
And what are our resources, and how do we mitigate the tax
Right.
impact? That's the question. That's a question that really is a collaborative thing between the town and the schools.
Well, and if we can share that in November instead of January,
Yes.
the towns may also make different decisions about when some of their expenditures or reserve funds are affected. I think in the past, we've seen capital things come up both in the school and in the towns in a couple different instances.
Yeah.
In Durham and in Madbury, at least, where that tends to not be a good combination. So-
And I like the time, because we have to finalize our budget in Durham at the end of December. So I would love in November for us to kind of reconvene and say, okay, here's what we think the impact is going to be. What can we do about it?
Yeah.
And that would be before we had finalized everything on the school side, and before hopefully the towns have, and it would give us hopefully a little bit of wiggle room.
I agree.
So let me kind of bring it back to my original question, which was, what do we need to deliver to the administration and the school board, and when? And I think what I'm hearing is we need to deliver a recommendation to the school board that we want to ask the administration to produce two or three different scenarios, and what those scenarios are. And we want to present that recommendation to the school board by the second meeting in September. Is that kind of or maybe, I don't know that we can do it any sooner unless we're going to decide it tonight.
Right. Right.
No, I think that, and then the only other thing I'll add to that, Michael, is that we're defining what we mean by impact.
As part of that.
Yeah, so that we, exactly, so we show up the 16th, we can lay it down and say, we only have, this is a rough draft, and we may have some rough draft numbers even, but we can't tell you exactly what the full numbers are until October.
I think that works because the full board then is participating in your deliberations, as opposed to coming in with a recommendation and then getting pummeled by, we weren't part of this conversation. You're bringing the conversation to them, but you're putting some parameters around it.
It reminds me a lot of what we do in the negotiating committee. We kind of come back to the board and say, okay, this is what we think. Are you guys okay with this? And I think that's what we're kind of saying is we think this is the way we should attack the budget. We're not picking any one of these yet. Are you okay with the process or the structure of it?
Right.
And if that impact, the choices of the impact we're talking about, if it's painful, I think we better know sooner rather than later. If it's a real painful impact, like, oh, this one is going to include layoffs and everything else, I think we got to put that in front of the board so they could be like, all right, that one might not be, we might not be leaning that way, but we have to find, a happy medium for everybody. So I'm not saying it is, but if it is, we got to know.
Yeah.
Right, and I guess my concern then would be to ask Jim and Sue, how much incremental work is it for you to produce those 3 different scenarios instead of one, kind of in the same, through the same budget process? Because that's really the only downside that I see, because it's easier for us.
Yeah.
We can handle that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we feel comfortable that putting these on the table, we can put the 3 scenarios together, and, as Brian alludes to, one of them might be so draconian that the board says, we can't do that.
Right.
But on the other hand, we might be able to find something close enough so we don't hit there.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I kind of like that, because it gives a contrast in the budget rather than just a straight budget. So you really could see, it was weird, when we did it at the town center, like, okay, can we live without a cruiser? And so it really became a creative way, okay, well, maybe we should bond this and do it like this, so.
it also changes the dynamic of the board workshop in October. The board workshop in October may be just having this conversation in depth, because the expenditure side of the budget is going to be defined by these ceilings.
Yep.
So rather than having each principal get up and do, a presentation, which, we know coming in is not going to include new positions. So it's really about how they fashion their budget to support the strategic plan. That could be a lot different presentation. That could be the presentation.
Yeah.
How is this budget supporting the strategic plan, rather than going through, the big items in the budget and,
Right.
and that kind of thing. And then that would allow the board more time to really focus in on the budget goal. Just a thought.
Well, and one thing that we heard, I think, in feedback from the full board in the past was we'd like more of a preview of the content of that workshop, that coming into the binder fresh for the first time. So if we have some of that ahead of time, even by, a few days, I think that lets us ask better questions as well and makes that more efficient, so.
It's
So,
scheduled to come to you on the 26th, and your meeting's on the 29th. Is that good enough?
That'll work.
I mean,
That
I
works
guess
for
we did
me.
that, but we never-
Yeah.
I think the whole idea, and I agree with Michael, we're kind of setting it up so people are saying, oh, rather than like, okay, that middle school is going to come here, we'll look at the budget and we'll say, okay, I can't live without this. Or, I think that's how it happened on the town council.
I'd put another thought out there that, for you guys to consider, and it goes along the idea that I just had, which involves perhaps framing the budget workshop for the board with the 3 of you, rather than it just be Sue putting
Yep.
stuff together.
Yeah.
And that way you guys are, participating in what the board needs and wants, instead of us trying to read minds.
That'll
And,
pull a little more weight too, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always cognizant, always hear, the voice of the 4 members who aren't on the committee about being directed or decisions being made.
Yep.
But, the board was pretty clear when they did their self-evaluation, they were looking for something different. It might be helpful to have the 3 of you define what that difference would be.
Yeah.
And, the role of the building level principals and directors may be decidedly different,
I think what we're really looking for is to provide everybody with enough information so that they can make an informed choice of which these ones they can live with. That's what it really should be. When we're going to the budget goal, people should say, well, I looked over the 2.5 and it doesn't include the school bus. What's the leases on the school bus, and how does that throw off the schedule of that? And that would be more, you begin to question individual things in the budget, like how does that work? And it would be different than just an overview.
Yeah.
I agree, and I think we'll each pick out different things most likely to ask about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think, and that's a pretty big range. Every 0.5% is $250,000. So we're talking about some significant differences in what those scenarios might be. I think I'm glad to hear that we're talking about potentially a 2-year projection. I think there's a couple of variables that we've discussed that give me concern about looking only at next year. One is, I am concerned about how we use the fund balance and the emergency fund, and relying on that creating a lower tax impact next year that creates some shock the second year out. And then, of course, we have the second round of the middle school bond as the other factor that makes that also complicated. I'm actually not so worried about the 2021 budget. I'm worried about the 2022 budget as being the harder one.
Interesting. I haven't gone there. I still think the big mountain is the first year, and the second mountain is a little bit smaller, but it's still a mountain. And I wouldn't set up the budget where there was ever a drop-off. It would set it up so that we would wind down our reliance on that additional revenue as we tried to refill at least part of it over the years until the economy recovers. Yeah.
Well, again, that $500,000 is still only 1%, so it doesn't buy us a whole lot.
No.
Yeah.
And then the issue in the '22 budget is the high school bond retires, and so that also lowers the mountain in the following year.
Do we have enough? Did that cover the process?
I think so. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, we're going to pick that up at the end of the agenda when we get.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming back to it. I wanted to, I think
Yeah.
your questions that were kind of.
Well, and I think that's good for us to tell, suggest to the full board next week that that's what we're expecting to
Yeah.
provide, so.
All right, that brings us, number 2 is the cash flow update. Only a business administrator would ask that.
Well, I had to have that because I had to figure out if we could do 2 bonds. What are you going to need for money? I can't go with 25 million when you're going to need 35 before we get to the second year. So the only thing that concerns me is they're a little ahead of schedule, and I've talked with Andre about that, and he said, we'll work it out. He's been very good about working it out and patient, so. And if, worst case scenario, we could do another ban, or we could go out to bond on our own. We need the money sooner.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is the bands are pretty cheap now.
Yeah.
But the flip side is if we have any surplus in cash and we want to make money off it, there's not much to be made.
Now,
But I think we would be selling the taxpayer short if we'd at least making do what we can to make some bit of money off it. But I guess my question is, and this is one thing I think we discussed it before, was do we need to have a warrant article to expend any interest we earn?
We will.
We will? Okay.
If we want to use it before the end of the project.
I think we want to use it anytime.
Oh, you have to
Yeah.
get it appropriated.
But no, at the end of the project, it shows up as fund balance, right?
Right, it'll be
Yeah,
fund
yeah,
balance, so you
right.
really can't use it, it's fund balance, but yeah.
fair enough.
And then, the thing that we were going to do with TD Bank is do laddered CDs, but CDs aren't as good as just putting it in your regular account, which is sad.
Well,
How are
CDs
you
have got to
day
type
trading
money
too?
for a while, too. So,
I think the $3 million, which we went through really fast, I think we earned $27 last night. But it wasn't in there very long, so, it was in and out still.
yeah. So I just, what my intent really was just to look at kind of a rolling amount of how much we're eating away at that bond, so how much we can at least keep in the bank, because I know there's going to be some months that are going to be different than others, and
Yep.
as you can see there, so, but, I mean, just my frugality, I guess, coming out, so. It's the finance in me that's trying to squeeze every penny out of every dollar.
that's a good thing, Brian. That's a
Yeah,
really good
Not a
thing.
bad thing, no.
Now, the problem is right now, it's such a terrible environment for it because the interest rates are so low. It was great for us getting the bond.
Well, yeah, I mean, what's good for one is bad for another.
Yeah.
So it's, everything is, all the bad stuff that happened worked in our favor for this project.
Yeah.
But at some point, I feel it's going to come back to bite us,
Well, the good thing is we didn't count on the interest to fund anything.
Right.
We weren't hardcore and said we have to have that interest money for this. I mean, we have some wish lists, but it's,
I mean, and the positive too is the Fed has come out and said that they're not changing the rates for at least a year. So that gives us leeway on the next, I mean, will we have to go out earlier, you think, for that one, for the second half?
Well, it will depend on the cash flow. The actual bond bank sale is the same every year. It'll be the same.
But it's there 2 a year, though, right? Isn't there one in
There's one
January?
in January.
Right.
We could do, if we had to do January.
Right.
Good, that's true.
But what would be the implications of us doing it in January?
Yeah, it would
really
change your payment schedule.
Make the 21, 22
Yeah.
budget that much more difficult
Yeah.
to address.
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. We could look at that. It's something.
A double-edged
to look at.
sword.
Yeah, it is. But it's an option. We can always.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad we discussed at the meeting that you just can't take $50 million and throw a new bank account and float it for a while.
Right, right.
And we're able to at least enlighten them that there's legal ramifications to those funds
Yeah,
when they come in.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
Well, that's kind of one of the reasons I put it in TD, because we have to keep very good track of that interest and report that for arbitrage reasons, so that's.
I mean, I think the interesting thing is what Sue is saying is with COVID and that the construction is actually kind of moving along quicker than anticipated. So it's like, it's a balancing act for sure.
If there was an issue, would the A&E, could the A&E be adjusted to avoid a second bond anticipation note? Is there any flexibility on that side of the billings that, would they be willing to delay or adjust the schedule on the A&E side a little bit to?
They are going to be pretty much finished up once we get into, the majority of their money comes through the planning. And I think Andre's numbers, yeah, as you can see,
I know that's a placeholder, but.
yeah, it's a placeholder. When I talked with Ron, most of their work is the design work, so we're going to be paying them a good chunk of their money now, and the rest of it is just going to be ongoing as they oversee the project.
So that sounds like a risk rather than, it sounds like that may be worse than what Andre's got here.
I did actually get Ron's and put it in my calculation when I did it.
Okay.
I just didn't, it was just an email, and like I said, I was going to do a spreadsheet and create a spreadsheet, but now that's all gone, so I'll just redo it all, now that I have the numbers, so. If we need to go sooner, we can go sooner. We'll just have to see. We were actually able to, with our fund balance, we were able to fund what we needed before, because we got the money today. Today, the money went in the bank, the 25 million's in the bank, and I have a couple of payments waiting for payment. And they were good about waiting, but we had a couple big ones last month that we were just, hoping that we could get, and we did. We managed, because the towns were good about giving us our funds too, so. Yeah, you have to keep an eye on that cash flow. It's a big one.
Okay, next thing is the unfilled positions.
So I gave you a slide on that. It's in your packet. So every time a position opens up, I am challenging the supervisor, whether it's a principal or director, is that a position we need to fill now? Is that a position that we can delay filling based on the board's decision related to how we're going to open up school? So, for this discussion tonight, it's around $300,000. Now, if we went, got to October 21st and the board said, time to fully open, then I would need to fill these positions. There may be positions on here, for example, a special ed para that Catherine comes forward and says, just had to move in, need to fill it. So this is kind of a moving number, but it's a substantial number, and this goes back to sort of Brian's idea of being frugal. If I don't, for example, in a remote setting, library paras, in a remote setting, I don't need them right now. But if we bring them all back, then I'm going to need them back. So this is sort of like a short-term gain that will feed into our fund balance.
Okay.
So, over the course of this school year, this will change. But you can see it already becomes a pretty substantial number. And some of these will be absolute savings, and some of these will be short-term savings that we have to replace. But this is the process I'm using to try to, not just stay inside the budget, but really, because if I was just trying to stay in the budget, I'd fill them all. But the idea of, can we hold back and really gain a substantial savings until the next decision by the board, and whether that model requires more service. So you can see it's coming from all areas of the district, from paras to custodians to learning lab tutors, and one that I added tonight was a part-time teacher. So, as long as I'm pushing the directors and principals to be thoughtful about whether they need a position, there's a real possibility that this money will materialize as part of our fund balance in the current budget. So what I am saying, though, is these wouldn't be positions I'd be recommending to cut from the future budget. It's just in the current model we're using, I'm challenging whether we need to fill them. The principals push back, as they should. Jim and others are pushing back. And I'm just simply saying, hey, if you need it, let me know. Tell me why you need it, and we'll fill it. But if you want it and you don't need it right now because of the model we're in, then let's hold. And that's really the philosophy I'm using on staffing right now.
And I think it's good that Sue brings up the conundrum we have is that there's the cap on the amount that we can put in, we can take from the fund balance. But again, I think it's going to be a pretty lean year, so if we're taking $500,000 out, in theory,
Exactly.
every cent we can get would be great.
And Sue's absolutely right. So it's a matter of we're pulling out and putting in kind of concurrently, so we maintain our level, but we're using it as an operational account. So I think this process is working. I mean, I will tell you that every time I say to somebody, do you need it, they scream, I need it, I need it. I say, well, tell me why. And then we get through the shock of it, and, well, I guess, I can wait. Okay. So for this opening of the school year, we have no library paras across the district. The librarians are going to service, their libraries until such time as we open and we need them. And the learning lab position is actually being filled by our library assistant at the high school. So we're shuffling people into positions and capturing a savings. When I'm talking to the principals and directors, I will tell you that, what I'm saying to them is these savings contribute to our ability to avoid layoffs in future years. And so I keep on connecting this. We're trying to avoid layoffs. We're trying to avoid layoffs. It's my mantra. And I think it actually is finally, kind of sinking in because, Michael knows this. Any organization really tries to fill whatever void they have immediately. And it's hard to stop the train and say, do we need this? Can we delay this? So it's worth doing, and I think we'll end up with some real savings in the end for this budget. But we can't look at this and say, oh, we can cut all these positions because these positions would be needed if we were fully open.
Other questions on the unfilled positions? All right, next up, bond savings and the PPE.
So we touched on this a little bit, when we were talking at the last board meeting. And, again, it's we receive no federal funds to support the PPE. So every dollar that we're spending on protecting our staff and protecting our students is coming from the approved budget, which was approved before we went into COVID times. And so when we see a number like, I think the first draft you saw in this was like $157,000 or $67,000, and then we brought it back to the administrative team and said, okay, so when we started this, it was just throw everything you need, you think you need at Jim Rizicki, and they did. And then we sat and said, okay, so that's all great, wonderful, you did what we were asked, but now we need to look at this in terms of what do we need to protect our students and staff, not what do we want. And, we tried to use the best science that was out there to support the decisions we were making. Clearly, masks are imperative as students and staff come back. And we only bought 1 month's worth. In the current scenario, those will last us for a good long time. so we didn't get out too far ahead of ourselves. And we were just very careful in putting together this plan. So this is $106,000, almost $107,000. And so the question the board always asks me is, where is that coming from? And it goes back to our budgeted amount of $650,000 for the note on the middle school, and that was an estimate, of course, and it was based on what the bond bank told us we would need, but the savings on that was 257, Sue?
It's up top there, 267,
267, so this $107,000 is coming from that savings, and we still have, a savings there of $150,000. So I just, it's not, the superintendent doesn't have any magic wand where money just creates. I have to be able to figure out if we have a
was the
need
goose for the
like
golden
this,
egg.
and I have to be able to report back to you how am I covering that need. So a lot of people feel like, the school system got millions of dollars because that's what the governor keeps on saying at the podium. Well, school systems across New Hampshire did. For Oyster River, it was $39,000. And so here's $107,000 worth of needs. This will go up. This is how what we think we need to open school at the elementary and high school and middle school. But there will be needs that we will have to fulfill. And we bought all the PPE for the nurses. They have the N95 masks, they have the gowns, they have the gloves, they have the shields. For special ed, we bought the masks and the shields because of the children. So we tried to be very strategic, but it may be that we get requests, say at the primary grades, where we didn't think about necessarily putting in shields or barriers. We did get some barriers for special ed in primary grades, but there may be other requests once the teachers get back. And one of the things I just want to be super careful of, and it came up in a conversation yesterday with the Guild, is that people don't stop bringing stuff in, because we vetted all of these materials, very carefully. And if people start bringing stuff in from home because they think it makes them safe, then we have an issue of cleaning it, as well as is it actually even useful.
Can I ask you a question? So one of the things that sticks in my mind is masks, because we're going to require everybody to wear masks. And it's good that you say, like, we vetted everything. It's like, with particularly elementary kids, I think of this almost as like, this is your back-to-school supplies that you're going to need. And so every kid who's coming back is going to need probably, 3 masks at least, because you got to be able to wash them. And the surgical ones probably aren't going to maybe fit the kids the best. So the question would be is like, can we, as we talk about back to school, kind of direct them to vendors or whatever? I'm not picking people, but here's like a well-made child-size mask that we think is really good, that's a good price, and you probably need 3 of them. Just like in the past, we'd say you need like 3-ring binders or anything else. And I'm not trying to mitigate our cost. Well, actually I am, but it's like, but I think that it would be helpful if the kids in the targeted things had their own cloth masks that were ones that we thought, so we don't keep buying all these disposable masks.
I would
Some
predict.
people are doing them as
I'm going to
fundraisers,
predict that's
too.
going to happen naturally, Al. I mean, most families at this point have invested in masks for their children when they're bringing them in stores and things like that. And plus, these things are kind of junky compared to having a nice quality, face mask. So I think, we have an obligation as a school system to provide what we need to provide to the families. And, but I think families are going to just naturally, do that very thing.
So can we hedge our bets in the stuff that we're sending out to families, particularly the elementary and the targeted audiences, rather than hoping that they're doing it, that we say, hey, you're going to need a cloth mask, this is what to look for in the fit, and just kind of direct them. It can't hurt.
No, that's
and it's
right.
like, it's just kind of a reminder, and again, that they're little kids, I see chocolate milk all over them and stuff, like, it's like, you're going to need like at least a couple of them so you can wash them.
And we're also going to need backups in the school like this, because little ones are going to get chocolate milk on their mask, and they're going to have a substitute, and so we're going to be in that situation. I have no problem with doing that, and I'll have the principals do it in the newsletters.
I think they're already saying you need to have a mask, and one will be provided if you don't arrive with one.
We are
The piece that's missing from that is what you said about, here's where to go get one if you
Yeah, I mean, again, like when I go up to Alton, there's this lady who sells masks, and she has like about a gazillion of them, but she actually has them down to like child-sized ones, and they're really nice. And if you're going to be...
Can you send me that?
Yeah, I will. It's like, the thing is, if you're going to be stuck in one of these things for like 2.5 to 4 or 5 hours, I actually grabbed this one, believe it or not, somebody sewed them, and I got it from the town hall, and it fits really well. It doesn't slide off my nose, so I think it's really important if it's uncomfortable, you're going to really want to take it off your face, which is what people are doing with those disposable ones. But if we can get kids to have a comfortable fit, reasonably comfortable fitting one that does the purpose, I think it'd be really helpful.
What if, I've seen certain PTOs and other groups kind of do fundraisers based upon them, like they get a bunch of these donated, sell them for $5 or $10, could at least be a fundraiser for the school as well, and kids get to pick whatever cool thing they want. So
Totally.
some of them you can get with, the emblem of the school on there, like the,
Yeah.
so, I mean, there's lots of opportunities out there. I mean, this whole pandemic has really brought up another whole section of the economy as far as new things that people need, and
People
now.
have been very generous. They
Yeah.
sent us masks. I mean, I have a half dozen cloth masks on my desk. All but 2 of them were given to me,
Yeah.
by community members who just wanted me to have one, which, is really nice. So I know that people are really unsure about little ones wearing masks, but I have to say that, based on the science, the masks and the 6-foot distancing and the hand washing, it's the way to go. So if you can give me that, Al,
Yeah, I will.
I'll be glad to.
And there's
put
like
that out.
also locally, I'll send you like Sarah Grandry at the Makery. She makes masks. That's really what's kept her store going, is making cloth masks. So there's a
Yeah.
couple of people locally who are doing it, and I'll give you their contact stuff. Okay, so other stuff about the PPE, other than it's expensive, and then we are lucky that we have the bond savings to pay for it.
Well, I guess my question too is, because you have on there, you have tents and stuff like that, but if we end up going into the winter and before we come back, say we come back January 1st, are we really going to do tents in the winter? I mean, that's some savings right there, so.
The tents were for the elementaries, though, mostly.
It was, September, October, November-ish, to get the kids in a place where they could be outside, to give the teachers a place to, share an outside teaching space. I think there's 2 per building, and I think David and Misty were thinking, rotate classes in an outside environment, because one of the things that we know from the 1918 pandemic is that outside education was really prevalent. I don't know if you guys saw the article from Europe, but Germany was actually teaching them right through the winter outside with heavy coats and so forth. So, and we've gotten a lot of emails from parents that are asking us to encourage, outside environments for classrooms and so forth. And, that is supported, and that's why we put the tents in to try to give David and Misty some outside classroom spaces that they could rotate classes through.
But given where we're having the middle school and the high school primarily remote, our monthly costs are going to be running more like a third of this, I would assume, right?
Yeah. The place that we're going to get hit hard that isn't on here is transportation. Because when you do targeted learning, our buses are going to run all day long, because, the child that 3 kids that you pick up are probably going to be, one's on the Newmarket line in Dover, one's going to be on the Newmarket Lee line, the other one's going to be on the Madbury Dover line. The buses are just going to be moving all day long.
Before I forget this, because somebody asked me this today, what about, what about lunches and that? So the middle school and the high school are going to be predominantly remote.
We still are under an obligation, just like Catherine is under the obligation on IDEA, federal law. Doris is under a federal law as well. So we have to offer the food program to all of our children, and then the parents will decide whether they want lunch or not. And at that point, Doris is, setting up a way to provide that lunch as we speak. So, yeah, we'll have to offer a lunch. Doesn't mean the kids have to eat it in the school. It could be a brown bag lunch as they leave in the morning, that kind of thing. So
We're not going to deliver it, though, are we, like we did in the spring?
we can't. Do you know how much that costs? That cost
A lot.
us $30,000.
But they can have the option of picking it up.
Yeah.
And this summer, I
Okay.
think we were serving 150 a day for people picking them up. So it's been successful, and there's a need, so. There is a bill before Congress to extend the free food again, so we'll see if that happens.
Right.
May be able to operate under the summer food program again and provide it free.
Does it create a gap in Doris's budget, though, if not as many students are purchasing lunch?
Absolutely.
There's an overhead
Yeah.
part of that.
It does, but she can consider her staffing too, and she's looking at creative ways. But yeah, I mean, this year, she's great by.
Yeah.
With that reimbursement for what we were serving
Right.
from the federal government, it was huge, and it brought her just a little bit under. So she's still got a hefty balance, and she's keeping her fingers crossed for this next year.
Okay.
But we can predict a negative impact there, Michael, because the kids just aren't available. The last year was successful because of the grant. Without that grant, our participation will shrink dramatically in this model. That's my prediction, and Doris's as well.
All right, that brings us back to the budget, which is the budget goal of 1.5, 2.5, 3.5%. Questions, thoughts? You want different numbers? Does those numbers work for people?
I guess I'm not sure that I think 1.5% is worth spending too much time on. I'd probably rather see 2.5, 3.5 maybe instead of, but I don't know, I defer to, I can't see us going as low as 1.5.
I can't either. Ironically enough, I was thinking the same thing, because I think the 3 is like kind of the Goldilocks one in the middle of those two, and 1.5 is like a really austere thing that I don't think most people have the appetite for. And if we're going to spend time on 3 of them, we might as well make them 3 that we think are realistic.
Right, right. And this is, so if we take this approach, this is taking the bottom line, not discounting revenue, not discounting state contribution. It's just saying we're looking at a bottom line revenue or a bottom line expense number of this, inclusive of everything, inclusive of the 2 negotiated agreements and inclusive of anticipated bond expenses.
Yes. That's how we've done it in the past. We've captured it all in that number.
Again, I think that'll lead us then to the conversation of like, we need to get to the 2.435, we may have to say we got to use $500,000 from the fund balance or from emergency funds.
Yeah, I agree.
But we're not specifying that right now.
No.
Yeah.
No. I think that will be part of the evolution of our conversation, particularly when we get to the budget workshop. You're going to talk about what you need to make it, what you need, how you're going to use revenue to make one of these or all of these goals.
And also in tradition of that workshop, it's generally been, based on administrative presentations, and certainly Sue and I would have a central role in this, but it may even, as we talk about that workshop, we may want to engage you and Michael and Brian in that presentation, because by then you'll know everything we know, and it may make sense to diversify the presentation differently than we have in the past, but also include the Finance Committee in it, just thinking out loud. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds good to me. Anything else on the numbers?
I would just, in terms of the PPE stuff, just before I leave that, I mean, the teaching staff and support staff have been truly amazing to work with. As we get closer to the opening, anxiety levels are increasing, but we should be able to predict our staffing pattern next week, based on the feedback that we're getting from from the parents and the registrations. But I also put out an email to the faculty in relation to looking to see who would volunteer to go remote, because I'm anticipating that in order to satisfy the remote learning contingent of parents and families, that I need more than just the people who have health issues to come in. So we're marrying all of that. The teachers' survey is due Friday. We're hoping that we'll have a good percentage of the parents on Monday, and so that'll inform, and we'll bring the board up to speed at the board meeting. So, we're very close to being able to answer significant questions. Just so you guys know, there are questions that we're being asked by parents that we don't have the answers for yet, because we need to know the staffing patterns. And so the emails, I'm sending you the emails directly related to the decisions of the board made in terms of the model, but also I'm sending you the ones related to athletics, because we're getting pounded on that.
Yep.
But on the issues where somebody just asked me a specific question related to how the model works, I'm not sending those to you. I'm just dealing with those regular. So, it's an attempt to keep you guys informed, and I hope it's not overwhelming your inbox like it is mine. So, just in, like, this morning, we were in a workshop with Portsmouth, and that 4-hour period we were in a workshop, 100 emails came in. So you're not seeing those. I just want to
No.
make sure you guys know I'm not sending you everything, just the stuff that related directly to the decision and upcoming decisions that you have to consider.
Are there teachers that can teach remotely from their classroom?
So that's an interesting question, Brian. So some school systems are insisting that their faculty teach from their schoolhouses, and I think that's a mistake, to be honest with you, and I'll tell you why. If you're trying to keep COVID at bay by not bringing in children, adults are just as susceptible, more so, of getting COVID. So the way that we're looking at it is, does the faculty member need to come in? For example, if we wanted to have a lab day for a group of kids, then the lab is in the high school, and that would be a targeted learning group for that day, and obviously we would want the staff in. But if there's no real reason for a staff member to be in, we prefer they stay remote, because then we don't have to worry about PPE, and we don't have to work about contagion and exposure. So, we're going to play it by ear with faculty. If somebody says they would like to come in, they'll make an appointment through their principal. That will happen. They'll be allowed to, and so forth. But massively bringing in people just so we can keep account of them is counterproductive to the whole idea of exposure. So it's, yes, they can come in, but we're not going to insist that they come in, because I think that's a mistake.
Well, I was thinking if they have better Wi-Fi, well, they plug right to the...
Oh, absolutely.
They'll be
Yeah.
a lot better than if they have spotty Wi-Fi at home.
Yeah, that's why I said if they have a reason to come in, they just communicate with their principal.
So so before we meet again, the Finance Committee meets again, we will also be past the deadline for the retirement incentive as well, right?
Yeah, you
So we'll have
want me to do a quick down and dirty on that right now?
I would, either way, I was going to say I could wait, but that's...
Yeah, no, it looks like, it looks like to me, as I look at it, I think we're approaching about $500,000 in savings, which is where I was hoping we would be. It's far less people, but as I look at our staffing needs for the upcoming school year, outgoing fourth graders, incoming kindergartens, and, making the prediction that kindergarten enrollment is constant, which it's been now for, 3 years. I think that of the elementary retirements, I know that we can live without 2 of them. Maybe we can live without 3, depending on the board's comfort with it, and Misty and David's not wanting to choke me to death if I say that. But I think we'll have that discussion of whether it's 2 or 3. So the number didn't grow to 17, but the number is the right number to get us to where I thought we would be as a threshold. So I think we're in pretty good shape, Michael.
Right. And then my other question is, there's been some discussion about the dependency of the relationship between students who are enrolled or whose parents fully unenroll them to do true homeschool, not remote learning, but homeschool, and the impact on our adequacy aid from the state. And I know you've responded to a few parents that it's a little over $3,000. I don't remember the exact.
$3,700.
$3,700. But when is that? That is not a number that is at risk this fall, right? That's dependent on last year's ADM, so that it would not, students, their choices that they make,
Adjusted.
it's adjusted. So the number that we get from the state in November
That's for next year.
for next year,
The number we get for last year gets adjusted twice during the year. based
during the year.
on
Wow.
Okay.
How do they do this? They do another count during the year?
October 1 count.
Okay.
Yeah, and we are getting interesting questions along those lines, Michael. And I truthfully have delayed answering them until next week, because to answer them today would mean I don't know. But, once we have that staffing pattern, for example, I got an email today from a person who said, I'm thinking about, signing up my child for remote, and then, signing up for remote, they really wanted to homeschool, but they decided to do remote, and then take a temporary, this is what it was, temporary, the law allows a temporary absentee period, so they didn't want to pull them out and homeschool and the district lose the $3,700. So it's really thoughtful of them. They wanted to ask if they could have a temporary leave to homeschool, but not be taken off the school books. Interestingly enough, the person who asked that question actually submitted the law with it. And so I read through the law, it was the first time I'd seen it, and it's permissible. So if somebody's pulling their child out for a temporary, it doesn't define temporary basis, and when I was talking, so I called the parent and talked to them at length about it. And I said, well, can temporary be defined as October 21st? And he said, why? And I said, because the board's going to be making their next, consideration on the model and where we are and whether, we'll have more kids in or change the model whatsoever. He said, that makes sense to me too. So we just agreed that he would we'd use the law for a temporary absence. We get to count the child during that time period based on this law. It was a unique approach. And I have another email from a small group of parents who are trying to create a pod. And so I don't know yet how to answer that, because I need to know what our staffing is, but they're trying to work together, and they want to know if there's some way the district can work with them. And so I don't have the direct answer to that one yet. So, people are asking pretty interesting questions. Lots of the questions are, can you tell me more about the model? I said, really can't until we know how many kids we're serving, which is frustrating for the parents, of course, because they want as much information as they can. But it's sort of the cart and the horse routine. If you tell me what you're going to do, I can tell you what I'm going to do. Well, if you tell me what you're going to do, I can tell you what I'm going to do. And so there is a little bit of that, but people have generally been very patient and respectful and, understanding, generally.
When I've heard, I was just talking to some people today who were talking about homeschooling, and my thought really was, well, wait a second. If you're taking the remote option, you're gaining some resources. Let's be real about it. If you are doing the full remote option, particularly at the elementary level, it's going to require you to do some homeschooling. But you might as well grab the resources, which is the structure from the online district curriculum, to help you guide through that.
Yeah,
I think to try to go off on your own, and I'm not saying it's a right or wrong decision, it's totally up to people.
Right.
But you're foregoing a resource that would really be helpful.
Yeah, and then I think a lot of parents are running against the wall of VLAX because the governor and the commissioner said VLAX is available to everybody and anybody who wants it.
Yeah.
And VLAX participation went up, I don't know, 135% over the summer. And so, the director of VLAX told the commissioner and governor, I can't meet this demand. And so I think a lot of people are trying to tie their plan to VLAX. A couple of school systems made that conscious effort to tie VLAX to their decision. Rochester and Barrington both did, and they're being told that doesn't work for VLAX. So there is that dilemma. So I think that parents who might want to use VLAX should really be considering using our remote model because
I've been through, so I've had 2 experiences with 2 different kids with VLAX. I'm not going to slam VLAX, but I would hope, particularly if we can do an online where the teacher is actually using Teams platform and actually conducting a class. And I saw a really great example of it last spring, even though everyone has PTSD over it, with American Studies that my daughter was in, and it was really good.
yeah.
And VLAX tends to be, there's much less, that's rare. You're going to be going through like videos and stuff like that. So it's really more of like the old school self-directed model. And my hope is that ours is,
Well, and that was the other question that the parent asked me, can I do the AM/PM model and do VLAX? Absolutely. There's no reason why you can't,
yeah.
so.
Well, and there's a big difference between using VLAX for a class and using VLAX for your entire curriculum, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's night and day, really.
I'm just saying, people who haven't done VLAX and worked their way through it, there's some good things about it, but I think, in terms of what a lot of families are used to, like where they're either in person or even remotely, where you're seeing an instructor and they're working your way through the class, that's generally not how VLAX works.
Yeah, and this all ties into the finance committee and the budget in terms of that $3,700. But, in terms of the overall budget, that per person subsidy isn't a huge part of a budget, significant for each town, but it's not like Rochester, where it represents the vast majority of their revenue. Unfortunately for our district, the vast majority of our revenue comes from the taxpayer.
So ironically enough, it wasn't the revenue. I'm just thinking about the resource for poor parents that are out there going through this. I just hate them to forego. If we build a really good remote platform, it's going to be a really good resource that you can, you can always supplement it with other stuff, but it's one I think you're probably going to want to.
And that's really where the opportunity is, right? We have talked about ways that the administration and the staff are preparing for remote learning in the fall and for it to be different than it was in the spring. A lot of parents, and I guess I would say myself too, it's hard to imagine exactly what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the opportunity is the proof starting September 2nd, right?
Yeah.
We have to demonstrate that, yes, it is going to be better. And this is not a finance question, I guess.
No, I got it.
But, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just.
Nope.
Follow-up question, though, on the mechanics of the adequacy aid. So the state adequacy aid, when it's recalculated, it can only fall a certain amount
Right.
from the commitment in,
Yep, you can't, right, there's a cap on it, I can't remember what it is, I don't know if it's,
I want to say it's 5%, but
I think it's 5%, I think it still is 5.
so where does that show up? If our adequacy ends up being less than we budgeted, so we're already past tax rate setting, is it only affecting the fund balance at that point? Okay. Okay.
Jim, is that part-time or whatever temporary law thing, is that something that you feel confident enough about that we could share with the general public at some point, or?
I don't want to take,
avoid some of
I
that.
don't want to take an official position on promoting it, but it's there, and this parent was smart enough. Because I just don't know what if that happened a lot, I don't know what the implications are, because we gave the parents a couple of concrete choices, and, there's always people who figure out, not ways around it so much as just different ways of asking a question that hasn't been considered. because we didn't know, or because, like the pod idea. It's very intriguing, but I don't know how to answer it yet, so
There's a lot of legalities involved in
Yeah.
this, too, so.
I'm not trying to keep anything away from anybody, it's just that I don't know enough about it to be promoting it.
Anything else? What else? And I'll throw a
Is
quick
our
one.
next,
What's that?
are we having Ron come to one of our finance meetings? Is it next month, I think? Didn't we talk about that in our last board meeting or something? Or was it Andre?
We talked about getting Andre in front of the full board because we haven't had him in front of the full board for a while. I don't think, finance, what did we talk about in, for
Trying to remember, was our-
finance?
The last time we met with, on the
Oh,
Thursdays.
it was we wanted to get the solar in front of you guys.
That's what it was.
So we wanted to get, run it through this committee before it got to the full committee, so we can have the conversation on
That's
solar.
what it was, yeah, because we can go a couple different ways with that,
Okay.
and we have some options, and depends where you want to be when it all
Next
ends.
meeting, put down revision for this group.
Oh, for this group?
Yeah. So we'll bring revision in with their models.
Yeah,
and
that'd be
then-
good.
And when is all the bids supposed to be
The
for the GMP?
Say again?
Aren't all the bids for the GMP supposed to come in the next few weeks?
Yes, the final bids, there's like $6 million still out in terms of Andre's bidding, and so we'll have those by the end of the month, and we'll know whether he has to trip into the contingency or not. But so far, he said he's been really getting great bids.
Well, I just did a couple of roof bids that came in today, and they're way under budget, so I think there's people, and they're desperate to work. So I think that's all working in our favor. They're like, we'll be there in a week, So,
So Al, do
Yes.
you want to have a meeting on the 26th and invite revision to that meeting?
Sure.
Does that work for you too?
So we're meeting on the 9th and on the 26th, is that right?
Yes, so we have them come in and do a prep meeting with you all, and then we'd have them present to the full board. Is that what you're asking, Michael?
No, so there's a finance committee meeting on the 9th, right? And then,
I've lost track. What, the board we
You're in
have,
September, Michael?
is that what you're talking about?
No, I was talking about this month. I was asking whether you wanted to have another meeting.
the 26th.
Oh, the 20th, I'm sorry, I'm thinking,
So we have school
I
board,
have,
we
I have the 9th scheduled. I don't have the 26th scheduled.
right.
Revision can come in on the 9th. We have plenty of time there. I just was wondering whether you wanted it earlier or later.
I'll ask everybody here.
What is the timing of when that input is,
We're okay if we do it on the 9th, because I'm recalling the conversation that Brian now has put on the table. So originally, I had set them for the 9th to come in and talk to you guys.
unless we had something else that needed to be on the
Let's
26th,
do
I would say not to have another
Give you
meeting.
the time. Yeah, I agree.
That'll give Sue and I a chance to rough out these 3 options, too.
There's a few other things going on over the next 3 weeks, too.
Just a few.
Just a few. Anything else?
Thank you, guys.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.